Good morning and welcome to Broadcast to Post. I'm Jeff Sangpeel, the Chief Technologist here at Keycode Media. Today, we're discussing building a television studio in 2021. We're going to be joined shortly by some of the greatest broadcast engineering minds on the Keycode Media team, discussing how their team successfully deploys over 700 audiovisual broadcast and production upgrade projects per year. The panel will be discussing the trends, the standards, and the things teams need to think about before building out their studio and control room spaces. So before we get to that, why are we at Keycode Media discussing broadcast workflows? Well, Keycode Media is simply the best dealer and systems integrator for installing and supporting large and small broadcast studios, mobile trucks, and fixed facilities, as well as fly packs and other remote production systems. Our success in designing, installing, and supporting broadcast systems and studios comes from our eclectic and experienced team that successfully installs a broad range of AV, post-production, and broadcast system solutions. Combine that with our 24/7 KTC aftermarket support plans and certified training, your team has everything it needs to implement your ideal system with ease. Lastly, our Keycode Education School provides industry-recognized certification. And if you work for a California qualified ETP media company, your entire staff can get trained for free. We're just about to launch a new Engineer Track certification program, so contact us or subscribe to our newsletter to learn more about that when it becomes available. So enough with this infomercial. Let's get to it. What are the essential components in a television studio and the choices? So patch panels and cables. You may ask, why would we start here? While patch panels and cables sound boring, it's likely the most important decision, as this is the nervous system of the entire facility. What types of cable are you going to use? And where in the room do cables need to be dropped to a patch panel? So traditional cameras can be set up through traditional coax, SDI cabling, or with 4K ready 12G SDI with audio and lighting over multi-pin with XLRs. Or Ethernet, VoIP. However, with the rapid advancements in video over IP, you could just as easily go all Ethernet with video over Ethernet protocols like SMPTE 2010 or NDI for video, Dante for audio, and DMX for lighting. So mixing it up in converters, most studios today use a mix of traditional and Ethernet cabling for their systems. The truth is, even if you do need to convert one of the SDI signals to Ethernet or Ethernet to SDI, there's plenty of digital glue from Blackmagic, Aja, and Decimator that's going to do the trick for you. Camera systems. Do you need one or do you need multiple cameras? Do they need to meet certain high quality recording specifications, or do they need to all be cameras that are operated from the control room? You've got large format, large sensor cameras, camcorders, PTZ cameras, or a variety of cameras in the studio to meet different needs. Rigging. While some elements are on the ground, other pieces need to be hung up in the air. Knowing the weight of all your hung lighting, LED walls, and stage elements will be key to knowing which rigging systems are the best. Not to mention the strict building code standards that can mean your structure could be safe or not. Lighting. So there's a future-proof trend with lighting, and it appears to be sticking around energy-efficient LEDs. Whether you're selecting daylight, LED light, spotlight, accent, static, or automated, there's a whole lot of choices out there. And the right and wrong decisions is the difference between your set looking like a jail cell or a professional TV studio. Once you decide how, we'll need to talk about how to control all that brightness. So the set, furniture, and virtual sets. The trend with sets is virtual. Whether you're using a green screen, video walls, or just a vintage desk from your garage, careful considerations need to be put into how that set's going to look and function while you are on camera. The trend right now, video walls. Microphones and audio, wireless, wired. You're going to hang it from the rigging, or you're going to put it sitting on the desk. Then there's IFB earpieces for talent, which leads us to comm systems. Who in production gets audio from whom? Perhaps camera folks who are on the set need one channel, while your on-set hosts get a return feed from program and other people joining remotely. Now, let's talk about all those behind-the-scenes people. What about the control room and your network there? What do you put in there? Video switchers. You're going to need to pick a video switcher that's going to meet your needs. Some switchers are narrowly focused, but extremely reliable. for shows that cannot have any failures. Other switchers take an all-in-one approach, providing you a full suite of flexible software tools, requiring less people to operate a show. Graphic systems. Some graphic systems are built to control on-air graphics, while others can manage on-set graphics for LED walls. There are even narrowly focused graphic systems that can do just weather or just social media. Encoders, decoders. How are you going to receive remote video signals from outside of your TV studio, like satellite trucks and LiveView cellular fly packs? Comm control, more communications, but this time for the producer, director, and other people behind the glass over there. Replay systems for sports and other needs that have to play out that last clip, maybe even in slow-mo. Control room video walls. There's a variety of reference monitors that can hang on custom brackets, which help your control room visually manage all of the video and audio components to make your broadcast work. Lighting control, audio control, all of these things need to be taken into account. Furniture. With all the cables and servers in your control room, it's important to have control room furniture which keeps knobs and dials near your fingertips while keeping the cables accessible but out of sight. And then hopefully soundproof area where all your neatly organized routers, structured cable, and all those noisy servers that are part of a TV studio today live. All right, we're getting into our panel discussion. I'm going to be asking a variety of questions, but first, who is our panel? So joining us today, John Furter. John is the VP of Broadcast Engineering for Keycode Media. John has over 35 years of experience in the broadcast industry, most notably as Director of Studio and Post-Production Engineering for the CBS Television Network in New York. Together with his engineering group, he was responsible for the design, construction, and support of all production and post-production facilities in the CBS Broadcast Center, including renovations for The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, HD upgrades for The Late Show with David Letterman, the NFL Today, 60 Minutes, 48 Hours, not to mention the 2008 construction of the new HD Control Room 47 for the CBS Evening News, and the new studio for CBS This Morning. John is a SMPTE Fellow and chairs the David Sarnoff Medal Award Committee and is a member of IEEE. Mason Pierce. Mason has over 10 years of experience working in all aspects of media and broadcast production, starting his career at the Tribune Media Group, managing 4K post and editorial environments, as well as 3 HD production studios. That operation managed numerous Chicago publications, Hoy, Chicago Magazine, the Hartfield Courant. While at Keycode Media, Mason has successfully managed the integration of multi-million-dollar new construction contracts with extremely complex workflows and tight deadlines. Andrew Cox. Andrew is a broadcast engineer for almost 30 years and has held senior engineering positions with several U.S. and international broadcast engineering companies. His extensive experience focuses on design and installation, maintenance, and support of broadcast systems worldwide, which is inclusive of design, planning, and project management. So after my initial questions, we'll be answering all of your audience questions. So please submit those at any time on the YouTube, Facebook, or Vimeo embedded landing page chats. All right, let's get to this. All right, gentlemen, let's kind of set the tone here. And in looking at our audience, it looks like we've got about half established broadcasters and public access channels that are probably veterans to our industry, looking to upgrade their existing TV studio equipment. We also have a good number of businesses and other sorts of folks in there, marketing departments, houses of worship, production facilities, everybody looking to build studios or studio-like spaces for their first time. So when we're answering questions, let's try to address both types of viewers. So let's start with the backbone of building a TV studio, structured cabling. We got cabling, we've got conduits, patch bays, Ethernet versus fiber, or coax, multi-connector audio cables, video over IP protocols, NDI, 2020, SRT, I'm sorry, SMPTE 2110. What decisions do engineers traditionally take to solving these challenges, and how are design choices evolving today? Let's go with alphabetical order on this one. Andrew, let's start with you.
All right. So, I always look at it this way in that I think the decisions we make haven't really changed in the sense of we look at the equipment we want, right? And I think the industry's always taken, we kind of like the in vogue products, right? I mean, one time it was Grass Valley, one time it's Sony, next time it's Ross, name your product, right? So it's always good, I think, to start with those kind of things. What do I want to do? Which equipment do I feel comfortable with? What do I want to try out and all that, right? So I take the big picture, say, okay, I want to do this. I've got this audio console, I've got this video switcher, and go from there. And then, okay, what does that mean? So if I was to look at, we'll take audio because it's probably a little bit more diverse on that front, is that if I had an analog console, it's going to be a lot of cabling locally. If I took a video switcher, where you've got a control panel, separate control processor, that's going to be separated. And I think, and that dictates your infrastructure, right? What are you going to cut into the wall, the floor? You can pass over the ceiling, how much weight that is. There's a lot of different considerations there. Now, we then look at maybe something like digital audio over IP, Dante systems, all of that. Now we've cut down to one or two cables, maybe. It's a much lighter touch on the building, smaller conduit, and all of that. So it has a big impact on how you look at what you have to put in the building. And I always look at that, and it's a big cost to install if you have a lot of cable. What else have we got there? I mean, it's I like to do that, and how and where do we come into the room? And what type of room is it? Does it need a panel? Do we not have a panel? And how do we break it out in the room? And it's very much simpler than it used to be, I guess. I think from a control surface perspective, we used to pile in so much cable into control rooms, and now we rarely do that. I mean, it's usually cat cable and a few audio lines, maybe a video line or two. It's very much lighter than it used to be. So, that's where I would start with infrastructure. Look at what you want and how you want to do it. Consider what you want. And maybe if you've got an old building and you're trying to pull a lot of cable, it may cause you some difficulty, and you may have to look at more lighter situations, right? IP systems, and keep it light. That's the way I look at it.
Cool. John, any follow-up on that?
Yeah, I think the other aspects that people need to consider, again, what is the application? What are you trying to do? How many sources do you have in a smaller situation? Say presentation studios for businesses, or perhaps smaller houses of worship, where you're not going to have a large video switcher or large audio mixer. It becomes economical to use, for instance, pan-tilt zoom cameras, that run over NDI, because then using Cat6 cable, you can combine the control and the video in one cable. It's one pull, and you reduce your cabling costs. I think that the more intricate you get as far as studio size is concerned and applications are concerned, then as Andrew was pointing out, your infrastructure budget tends to increase. The more you want to do, the more you have to put in. I think that the other thing that needs to be considered in a lot of places is the idea of cable tray, conduit, and in some buildings, in some newer buildings where the air conditioning is plenum, where you've got the floor and the ceiling is actually your ducts, as opposed to having ducted air conditioning, then you have to consider plenum cabling, or if you want to run conduit to run traditional cabling through.
Very cool. Mason, anything to add?
I mean, I'll kind of take while I agree with Andrew, definitely equipment is usually a great place to start in understanding your infrastructure and infrastructure needs. I'm going to approach this from maybe some direction that our viewers are approaching it from, which is you start, and is this a greenfield build, meaning it's a brand new net building from the ground up, or is this an existing build? That immediately is going to change your key decision making on how you're going to approach your infrastructure. Greenfield, hey, you have a great opportunity to put that infrastructure in place. Now, you probably know some of your equipment, maybe not all of it, but the challenge in those facilities is, how do I design for the future? One thing I would say for those that are looking at greenfield buildings is pay attention to the fact that everything is moving towards networking focused and less baseband focused. Fiber is going to be much more popular than, for example, coax. Triax is being replaced with SMPTE, which is optical fiber and copper composite cable. So there are, considerations there that you need to keep in mind of, hey, am I going to be, as I move through this facility's lifespan, how do I get myself in the best position to succeed down the road? Now that becomes much more difficult in the existing building, and that's where, it's really going to be one of those pieces of do your best to design for the future. While you're busting walls open and doing things, I highly recommend adding additional conduit, adding additional back boxes, thinking about those future points down the road, because once you've opened up that wall, floor, ceiling, whatever it is, the cost has already been incurred. So take advantage of that while you have that ability, and try to do your best to plan for the future accordingly based off what you think the future usage of those spaces could even become. We find oftentimes conference rooms turn to studios, things of that type of nature. So trying to do as best as you can to have the foresight in the front end. And that's one of my favorite challenges as we work with our clients.
I've also seen offices turn into production spaces or editorial spaces. It's just, you never can tell what might happen a couple months or a couple years down the road. One quick definition, plenum, that air return, which is in the actual ceiling, it means that your cable needs to be plenum rated, which it's a life safety thing. If it catches fire, it doesn't give off toxic chemicals. Plenum rated cable is more expensive. So also something to think about if you're dealing with the architects on a greenfield build. So we've talked a little bit about SDI and baseband. Let's dial a little bit more into that. There's 12G. SDI cables have gone from 1.5G to 3G to 6G and now 12G. How's that going to impact your design as well as your final capabilities of a studio? Mason, I know you've got a little experience with this. Let's start off with you.
Yeah, definitely. So 12G is a new beast. Baseband, we've all grown accustomed to, plug and play. That was really well developed in that transition originally into SDI. And now, we're pushing the limits on the capability of what a coaxial cable can actually perform at. Going back to kind of dovetail the previous question, plenum versus riser, not only does plenum obviously not give off toxic gases and things of that nature, but also performs at a lower level as well. We traditionally in baseband it's always just been, hey, here's my distance chart, 3G, 6G and below, everything. These are my lengths and I'm good to go. As 12G has been introduced, I found in the field, and something that, KeyCode will be working to do white papers on as we further discover some of these things. 12G doesn't actually have as stringent of a performance specification as what we're used to in baseband. So traditional baseband design is a little bit more challenging because you need to now with 12G, there's wider variances and tolerances on loss and what the cable will do, what the equipment receiver will do, what the equipment transmitter will do. And so realistically, you can't just go by tables anymore. You need to actually assess based off your output equipment, the cabling you're using, any sort of infrastructure you're running through, whether that be patch panels, connection or barrels, connection points, things of that nature. and then what the sensitivity of the receiver on the other side will be. This is where, you know, leveraging integrators to have those document libraries of these performance specs is key. Getting these specs is very difficult for manufacturers because 12G is growing quickly. It's been proving quickly. Chipsets are definitely performing better and better as we go down the road. So in this infancy, if you will, and I know 12G has been around for a while, but we're still really dialing into its true performance. And that's something that everyone should be highly cautious of if you are developing a 12G building, as well as considering fiber in many positions where lengths traditionally met with copper infrastructure, probably if they're on the bleeding edge there, might not work with that same copper infrastructure, even in 12G rated cabling.
Yeah, I took a look through our line card. We carry a lot of people, but we don't have a cable stretcher yet. Andrew, any follow-up on that?
No, I think I agree mostly with Mason. He's done a lot more testing on 12G than me, but I'm definitely seeing a lot more fiber in infrastructure nowadays. I mean, not just for LAN connectivity, but it's starting to come out now in video. And I think although it's been around for a while, this is I think the last couple of years or so now is the first time we're really seeing it en masse in video. And surely that's going to be the future. That's for certain.
Very cool. John, anything to add there?
Real quick, two real quick things. Number one, there's a lot of 12G equipment that's either quad link or dual link. So it's quad link 3G or dual link 6G. So you take that into account. More and more equipment is getting to be single link. But the other thing is in the earlier days of fiber, and even through to today, it's very important that you calculate a loss budget. For every connector, you have a loss. Now that we're up in 12G with frequencies like that, it's important to do that now using coax as well because of the frequency. And then you take into account, okay, so I'm going 50 feet from my server to a patch panel. What's the loss through the patch panel? So all of that has to be taken into account. And to Mason's point, contracting an integrator that's been through it a few times, that has the experience building these systems, has started to build these processes in and can help you make the right decisions moving forward.
Also knowing that you can't just grab a old 3G patch field and toss it in there. It's not going to pass 12G signals. So let's get to the starting point of it all. Cameras. If you're looking for cameras, quality and technology, sometimes it comes down to the manpower choices for your productions, for your budgets in there, and sometimes personal vendor preferences. Some teams want to have no in-studio camera operators, so full PTZ, remote control setups from the control room, even from a remote location on the other side of the country. You can do that now. Some need those large sensor cameras like Panasonic's VariCam, Arri, sometimes Red. And there's, taking into considerations the glass there, the amount of throw you're going to need, especially if you don't have camera operators in your studio or production space. John, what are you seeing the trend with in-studio cameras and the features around them and their connectivity?
Well, again, it comes back to there are more choices you have for cameras. So you have to think a lot more carefully about who you are, what you're trying to do, what your application is. For instance, a major market local television station will use a more traditional shoulder mount. Well, now there are no such things as studio cameras anymore. There are the shoulder mount cameras with studio build-up kits to which they attach the lens. And that will likely be mounted on a more traditional robotic pedestal with robotic pedestal controls. If you are a smaller business, well, not even a smaller business, but a business with a production studio where, again, you want to save money by using a pan tilt zoom control. The range of PTZ cameras has really improved. Companies, such as Sony and Panasonic, the traditional manufacturers have made great advances in PTZ cameras, so that if I'm designing a system for a city council, I will choose one model, for example, of Panasonic camera. But if I'm going into a house of worship, for instance, we recently completed a wonderful project at St. John's Episcopal Cathedral in downtown Denver. This is a 110-year-old cathedral with stained glass and dark corners and stuff. Panasonic makes another camera that has high dynamic range built in and better color reproduction. So you can run the gamut of choices, again, based on the environment, in which you're producing. And in those cases, basically what we've done, and I know we're going to touch on this in the future, further in this program, we were able to work with the cathedral, for instance, to, since there was not too many sources, to sort of suggest a smaller sized video switcher to give them a little bit more budget to get the proper camera. And when we were able to demonstrate the two cameras side by side, both of which were very good cameras, where we were able to show the high dynamic range capabilities of the camera that they eventually went with. That's probably the biggest thing I would say is, what are your cameras doing? Are they stationary, or are you going to be trucking in and out? If you're an ad agency, then your ad agency is probably the kind of a customer that would want to use, for instance, an ARRI camera or Panasonic camera. ARRI had, as we've talked about before, ARRI had introduced a couple of years ago, I think it was 2019 NAB, the system where they were incorporating their cameras into studio situations, working with companies such as Multidyne for the fiber back to go back to a traditional control system, so that an ARRI camera can be tied to a Sony CCU and Sony controllers, or tied through, and I never pronounce this company right, I believe it's a Swedish company, Scarhage, and their control system, and basically incorporated a cinema style camera into a broadcast or video production studio. Then you get to your choice of glass in a situation like that. Am I going to go with a broadcast lens and run it through a physical adapter that'll knock down a few stops of sensitivity? Or am I better served using traditional film style T-rated lenses that don't necessarily zoom, that you're going to have to truck in and out to use? So again, the range is wide open. The one thing I like to say is, in the age of SD broadcasting, the lens was better than the camera, because the lenses were so fantastic, and the pickups in the camera, I mean, they're great, but that's where the limitations are. It is totally changed now in our world today. The camera is better than the lens, and what the major lens manufacturers have been able to do, specifically in building UHD lenses, is just phenomenal. I've read some white papers and talked to some folks from Canon as to all of the components that go into a portable wide angle lens. It's amazing.
And the other interesting thing about glass these days is there's a lot more environmental restrictions about how they make it. So a lot of the interesting things that used to be part and parcel of lenses aren't there any longer because, they're toxic chemicals. Mason, thoughts on cameras?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely second John. It's the world's your oyster when it comes to cameras. There's a flavor and a method to the means for pretty much everything these days. We're seeing, for example, Sony just introduced large format sensors in the more traditional shoulder mount broadcast style bodies, kind of an answer to their old F55 type systems. You're seeing more introduction of cinema type cameras into, multi-cam type facilities, utilizing third-party interconnectivity to control systems, getting signals managed, so on and so forth. My biggest recommendation is really well define what you're looking to accomplish. Acquisition is where it all starts. If you've messed up from the beginning, it does not matter how awesome your switcher is, how awesome your signal flow will be, processing, everything. It's very key to make sure you nail that at the front end, because that's going to be what you're playing with all the way down the road. The other piece that I always find interesting is as you start to assemble your camera or acquisition systems, it might not all be the same form factor type model, but always bear in mind to do the best you can to match your sensors. And that's something that across manufacturers is easy enough to do. And even across manufacturer lines, if you're using, multi-sensor cameras and then you add in a single sensor PTZ shot, it's going to look different. So it's all about managing your acquisition types and trying to align those to allow for as little shading, painting, and back-end work for your production team to be able to make that look like a seamless production. Very doable, but something that needs to be taken in mind as you work towards defining those acquisition systems.
Very cool. Andrew, anything to add on the topic?
Very little, but I agree with Mason there. With definitely camera matching is a big deal. Something we'll talk about a little later, I guess, as well. In acquisition is lighting and how important that is to the whole camera.
We're about to get there.
Yeah, I think we are. So, definitely that. And typically the one comment I'd make is I'm really blown away with the quality of the small PTZs now. We see them used so frequently, particularly in the last couple of years now, right? Because we've done a lot of work in the church arena, the local government arena, and typically they've not had cameras, right? And we've only ever done audio recordings typically in those arenas. Now there's more video, and that quality and the lenses we get, even in the small PTZs, are so much better than we used to get, even with the handhelds and stuff. So I just really feel good about the PTZs themselves now are just much more usable. And to Mason's point, we can match them with pretty much anything. You just take a bit of care with them. They're multi-sensor half the time, and it just makes them more flexible.
Very cool. And the one thing to look out there for, I would say, with the PTZs is the kind of optics you're putting on the front. So because you don't have an operator, if you're talking about a house of worship or like a city council chamber where you've got a long throw, you need to make sure the lens will actually get you there. So you don't want to end up with, where you thought you'd get a medium close up and you've got a medium wide. So something to just think about as you're planning out unmanned camera positions. So as Andrew mentioned, lighting. So none of these things will work without being able to actually see what they're looking at. So what do you think are the important decisions that have to be made when you're selecting lighting for a space? Does rigging impact your decisions with lighting? What are the overall trends we're seeing in lighting today? John, let's start with you.
Well, I think the biggest thing that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years is that municipalities are insisting on green solutions and LEED rated solutions. So the move from the traditional 2K, 1K, big tungsten lamps that require a lot of rigging to LED systems to save energy. I can speak back to installations I've done where studios could literally cut their air conditioning bill from 1/3 to 1/2 simply by going to LEDs. They're lighter, they're easier to control. With DMX control, you can plug into basically call it a house outlet, and run it off of a standard outlet. And the DMX control daisy chains to all of the lights. You also have the availability not only to change the luminance value of the light, the brightness of the light, but with some of these LEDs, you can actually change the colors of them and do color effects. So that, I think that's the biggest trend. LEDs, they're lighter, they use a lot less energy, they're a lot easier to control. You don't need those big old dimmer boards that you used to have. And I think anybody considering a new facility should go in the LED direction. And as far as rigging goes, you can do a traditional pipe. You can do the traditional pipe setup that you have in traditional studios, but you don't need the load bearing capabilities that you used to have.
Cool. I mean, also, if you're wondering about LEED, L-E-E-D, that stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's a green building thing, and it's affecting a lot of studio builds. Also, the lights I'm sitting under here in Keycode Studio in Burbank, we could take my fill light and turn it into lightning. You just tell it, oh, you're going to flash blue every once in a while, and it does that. That's not something that really existed a number of years ago. Mason, follow up on lighting.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, I mean, LED opens the door to so many different effects. We're seeing that in a lot of stages, being able to use more effect type light in addition to production light out of the same fixture. Huge budget savings there. Totally agree with John. The tungsten era is, been burning out, right? So we're finally getting to the point where buildings are required to stick to the LEED's mandates and strive for bronze, silver, gold, whatever that building's goals are. And it just simply can't be done in most cases with a tungsten type system. That being said, the fixtures are still around to some degree, and in some cases do have a fit, but I would say definitely the trends in lighting are moving towards LED. Focusing on another aspect, the grid versus ballast versus ballasted line set versus, motor hung truss. There's a lot of options. So as you plan, I'm always the planner, or my mind always goes to the planning. So just like the infrastructure conversation, look at your space, define what your goals are, what type of productions you're going to be doing. Is it audience? Is there no audience? Things of these types of considerations are important to consider because that is going to dictate what maybe makes the most sense for your venue on how you're going to support that lighting. Is it a fixed grid? Is it a line set ballast that system that can be lowered and raised for easy swap outs? Are you going to be swapping things out? Is there value to those things? As you get more complex in rigging, the pricing will go up, but that can create major efficiencies for your company and your operations that will help reduce those costs over the long run.
Excellent. Andrew, any thoughts on lighting before we move on?
One quick one, I think, which is, recently I've seen products like the Mega Batten, which puts the power connector, DMX connector, actually in the tubing, the grid tube. Kind of clean, neat, and simple, and makes the most of the low power requirement, that you see in LEDs now. So, there's those type of products. I think that we'll see more of those coming forward too. I think that's just the first of many.
Awesome. So we mentioned LED, so we need to get into LED walls and sets. How do you folks feel that virtualization has been changing what space and lighting requirements need to be? Anyone jump on that?
All right.
Well, I'll take a very simple general view, right? Which is probably the most powerful light source and heat source actually in the studio these days, depending on how large it is, of course. But I think it's definitely the largest heat source now we see in the studio, if we see it. Virtualization, I probably can't speak to that. I mean, most of my work recently has been more in the public domain. So where they don't use that so much. But yeah, but one of the ones I have seen, definitely a big heat source, but very flexible.
I'll jump in to start talking about some AR, VR at least. I think AR, VR, especially, you know, COVID really changed a lot of the way productions happened, and Hollywood and others had already started adopting AR, VR, no doubt. AR, VR is now coming down in price to a point where people who are corporate flash studios, you know, marketing teams, you don't have to be a big production stage or studio like something like Diamond View or, you know, some of those big shops that specialize in that type of technology. It's more approachable. Brainstorm, others are creating more turnkey solutions where you don't need to be a Cinema 4D expert to build these complex environments, and you have more of a stock option of here's some things and we can create these environments. Augmented reality versus virtual reality. I think it's very cool to layer in augmented to kick up your production a notch and create some cool effects and things that you can do in a basic space. So oftentimes when people come to us and are like, okay, we're building this huge set or this huge stage or this studio or whatever it is, we want to do these 25 things in it. It's like, okay, well, you have a equal sized room for all the scenery and everything else that you're going to be using? And the answer is always no. And it's an easy fix nowadays because there are augmented reality and virtual reality sets that can look realistic, that don't look just, and everyone's seen them and we all know what we're talking about. It's come a long way, and it's come a long way down in price as well. So I highly recommend those who haven't necessarily looked at those types of technologies to just go back and see what people are doing these days, because there are viable options that will help you leverage a smaller space or a space that was fixed for a specific use to now open that space up to additional uses and create a bigger return on that investment.
I mean, it sounds like this is the way. And the other cool thing about some of that is if you decide, okay, the forest we're shooting in needs more trees. Okay, go into Unreal Engine, add more trees. Guys, take a lunch break, and you know the forest will be ready. You know, in half an hour, it's all rendered out and ready to go. So a lot of interesting abilities to change very rapidly. John, any last thoughts on that?
Yeah, two quick ones. So if you're thinking of VR, if you're thinking of building a green screen, that hops back to the lighting discussion. You have to make sure that you select lighting so you have good flat lighting across your green screen, so that your effect looks complete. Second thing, LED walls. If you're going to use LED walls as a backdrop, say for instance you're doing a news type program where you're going to be sitting in front of the LED wall, and this is part of the design that we would do, is making sure that everything is properly synchronized. A long time ago, well, not that long ago, but a few years ago, I did a design for a major stage back east, and there were synchronization issues between the LED wall processor and the cameras. And a lot of that has been taken care of now because the manufacturers are more cognizant of it, but you need to be aware in your design that everything still needs to be synchronized.
Excellent. So getting out of the visual aspect, you know, video without audio is surveillance. So are we seeing any new trends in audio that are impacting how studios are ending up being designed? Andrew, you want to take a crack at that one?
Well, I think the big player there is Dante, obviously. I mean, that's been our biggest change, I think, in the last few years. I mean, it started very small and it's really impacted, I think, in 2 or 3 years, really, right? When we've gone from almost a few products to every product, and I think that'll continue. It's interesting, you know, because you can outboard everything really at that point, and the console, where it was always the end point for audio, you know, you plugged all your mics in, you did everything from there. You don't have to do that anymore. You know, you outboard all of your inputs to wherever it is, the stage, the voiceover booth, wherever that source may be, and you've got one, maybe two, if you want backup on the Dante network, and just bring it all back on the network. You can put it wherever you want on your board. I mean, the flexibility is endless, really, and it's multicast, and you can just put it where you want, when you want, how you want, and change it each and every time. And I think that's the biggest trend we've seen, and I think that that moves in. I've seen, the trend now is to move that into intercom as well, and that's always been an odd clarity issue. Let's put it that way, right? And we're hearing better quality communications now, which will only improve things. I think it's just an all-round good thing. Communications and flexibility. I think that's the big dominant factor of Dante.
Definitely. Let's we're starting to run short on time. Let's jump to control room. So control rooms, it's the spot where everybody controls everything. It's important. So it's important for anything that's broadcast TV, live streaming, or any multicam production. Let's get into a couple aspects of the control room, starting with video switchers. What video switcher technology have you been installing recently? Why would a customer choose Ross versus NewTek versus Grass Valley with all the bells and whistles? John, you want to take lead on that one?
Yeah, again, it's the size of the productions you're going to do and the complexity. We install a lot of NewTek. We're actually the largest NewTek reseller there is. And we're finding lots of excellent applications for those, from commission chambers, houses of worship, smaller type installations of those, up to productions for daytime talk shows where NDI has found a really good application and a really good niche. We sell a lot of Ross. Ross has a lot of solutions over the wide range of sizes of applications that we're doing. And I think a company like Ross is a good company to look at, especially if you're trying to get the most production with the fewest people. Because in addition to the video switcher and everything else that they make, they tie it together with a control system so that you could virtually buy all of your equipment, graphics, video switcher, playback, routing switcher, even cameras from RAW and their pedestals or their pan-tilt zoom systems, and control it all through Overdrive. So again, it's a question of, am I doing a news show? And I don't want to have anybody on the floor except for the talent and the floor manager. Can I do that? One of the local stations in New York City has 3 people in their control room to do their 5, 6, and 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock news through a system. It's not Ross's. I believe it's the Sony ELC system, but we're seeing that. So again, it's application, type of programs you're doing, and the amount of people you feel you need or you want to use to get the production done.
Cool. Mason, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely echo John's comments, obviously, but I think when I approach with any partner or client, that part of the consideration, it's, how many operators do I have? What is my expectations of the operational function of this system? Like John was pointing out, there's a lot of what I call the all-in-one boxes, like Simply Live, NewTek, Ross makes one. There's a lot of options in that area of the market, which make a lot of sense for people who are closing that control room down to very few users that need to execute many things and maybe not as complex of a show. But the big boys are still out there, and they're still very much viable for the large ME, big effects buses, of like the Grass and Sony type of the world. I think there's some cool technology happening out there as far as the ability, like for example, Sony's switcher, the ability to create virtualized switchers within the physical switcher and share out permissions and usage of MEs and various effects buses. So it's a, you know, that we see some of that in the technology mix, which has a lot of legs for people who are looking to do multiple spaces, but maybe needs to do one big production sometimes and collapse it all back together. And then, of course, you know, the tried and true Rosses like Acuity or Grasses. And a lot of times, and oftentimes, the consideration comes down to, if I have a TD on staff and he likes a certain thing and is comfortable with a certain thing, you go with the certain thing. Or you can take that consideration in, who am I going to be bringing in for staffing this equipment? Because with any, you know, system of that nature, there is an operator usability level that needs to be considered. How comfortable are they with that technology? How comfortable are they with that control service to throw a show? So that's something that definitely bear in mind as you make those decisions.
Very cool. So we got a question from Mark, and then there's another question from Fred that I'm going to kind of glue together here. Essential planning aspects to consider to future-proof a studio or anticipate evolving technology and protocols, and any advice on system plant design documentation. Mason, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. Fiber. That's my answer to that one. You want to talk about future-proofing a space, fiber optic infrastructure. Fiber optic infrastructure is going to be largely the future. And I mean, that's where everything is going. Look at 2110, look at AES 67 and doing larger count audio movement across the networks. All of those are going to leverage fiber optic infrastructure. Plant design, I mean, that's a fun question because I feel like we always get invited to the party at the very end, and the architect already has 100% CDs and we're just walking in trying to get our stuff shoved in where we can get it. I would say plant design and documentation, engage your integrator early. You will never regret that. It will ease your process through construction, whether it's greenfield build or renovation build. It's something that is keenly missed across many of our engagements, and not by necessarily anyone's fault. Largely, the architect doesn't want to engage, they're not ready to engage, but I do stress that it is important to have that documentation and design done early, incorporated into mechanical drawings and into the actual plans for the facility. That's a key piece that really should be documented and documented well in advance. Now, keeping up with that documentation is also key as you move down the road. And this is why, and many of our KTC programs include updating your documentation as we support your facility through its time. So that's another piece, that your documentation set's only going to be as good as long as you've kept it up to date.
Yeah, I just have to echo the fiber comment. I put in facilities where, you know, people have asked me, why are you putting in so much fiber? And the answer is, shh, you'll see why in a couple of years. And one of those facilities wound up producing one of the large political conventions over the last season. I don't think it could have done it without the facility, without the fiber being in place. John, any comments on that?
I think that the short comment I'd like to make is I completely echo everything Mason said about get your integrator engaged in the process early. There are 3 large, expensive things that if you don't do them right, you cannot go back and fix: power, air conditioning, and acoustic isolation. And we've seen in a lot of places we've gone into, one very recently, it's a beautiful studio, it's going to produce great programming, but the architect didn't engage an acoustician or us to discuss with an acoustician, and now we're going back to talk to them about, well, how can we fix this? How can we fix this now? And that's sort of the kind of thing where if everything's already built and your lighting grid's up and your sets are all built, it's kind of hard to go back and put acoustic isolation in. And same thing with the air conditioning. It's hard to go back to the ductwork, take the ductwork apart, and put in all of your acoustic isolation. And again, air conditioning for all the people and for the fixtures that you're going to have in your room, you have to account for that. And you also have to account for the noise it may generate if the air conditioning kicks on while you're in the middle of producing a show. So it's important to get people like us in early to talk with your architect and your GC to really nail down those requirements.
So there's one little point I don't agree with John on. You can go back and add air conditioning. It's just going to cost you a ton of money.
It's terribly
I've walked into
expensive.
machine rooms before where they've had to upgrade the air conditioning, and you walk in and it's an operating machine room, and you look up and you can see the sky because they've had to rip open the roof. So you don't want to incur those sorts of costs. Andrew, any thoughts on the documentation question there?
I think it's already been said. You know, a lot of people just don't do it, right? Because it's got to get it done, got to get it plugged in, got to get it working, and then once it's working, forget it, right? And that's the unfortunate part of a running station, or whatever you want to call it, running operation. And once you got it working, we'll get to that eventually. And of course, that never happens.
Definitely. So Ian came up with a question. How does KCM guide clients in choosing PTP and SDN solutions for a SMPTE 2110 environment?
Man, that's a fun one. Can we talk about interoperability in this too? It's still, I mean, with the advent and continuing improvement of the later ISOs that represent 2110 and MOS being the net result of some of that, we are getting through a lot of those hurdles. That conversation is tough. It always is going to be highly dependent on the equipment selections that you've made. We all, I go back to my baseband conversation. We all have gotten so used to, you plug this in here, you plug this in there, and it works. All the handshake is happening. Everything's coming across. It's all looks great. That is now needing to be redefined and reevaluated on the 2110 side. Now, has it made significant leaps from even a year ago? Absolutely. And we are seeing that throughout. But there's still players that are doing some of their own custom little bits of managing that flow. Full COTS solutions are absolutely possible. It just gets really hairy and complicated when you're using COTS and starting to then connect out to specific third parties like an Evertz or a Grass or a Sony or a whoever that might need some level of finesse on the COTS side to make it all work. So the interoperability is vastly improving, isn't 100% there yet, I would say, which means it is very much a unique conversation specific to what your environment and what your environment's going to have as far as equipment selections go.
Yep. And I mean, PTP is sync generation once you get out of baseband. If you don't have PTP working, you have nothing. You have no signals going anywhere. Mm-hmm. Anything to add, Andrew or John?
Well, I think what's on the PTP side, what's been very, very helpful is the major players in sync generation have incorporated using PTP as the Genlock source, and then from that derived the more traditional time code, black burst, and other synchronizing signals. So I think that's been handled pretty well. You just have to make sure that with these protocols, you need more redundancy. So not just a grandmaster, but perhaps a backup grandmaster, and then really laying out how the generators, and I don't want to get into politically correct talk. Nowadays we're very cautious of that. But your main source, and then your subsequent sources of clock and sync signals, and that they're tied in.
Interesting question here from Ross. What are the Ross Callan, not Ross the company? What are the considerations for Dante and NDI over existing enterprise LAN? Solid infrastructure, but have had issues in looking to find deployable solutions. Be difficult to make a large commitment to replacing all of our switchers for this project. Anyone want to jump on that one?
Working with IT is always fun, right? So that's all that. Let's start that conversation there. You probably have a very decent backbone, and you probably got what you need in place to handle the bandwidths that you're actually asking to throw at it. Some cases that's not the case, and that's where I always start. trying to peel back the layers of the onion to get to that top level IT guy that can tell me what's the backbone of this network, how is this network designed fundamentally, and how can I leverage these lanes. Then getting them to agree to open up some of those lanes is where I typically find is our biggest hurdles. We can get ports, we're all running, it seems good, but then we have these issues as we start to traverse multiple switches or start to traverse to other sites, whether it's on the same campus or even on a larger corporate WAN. It's all about identifying the network path from node to node and knowing exactly what it's going to traverse and making sure all of the appropriate port rules and settings and protocols are all in place and supported on that hardware. And it's really just a matter of the painstaking process of working through the onion with IT. Ideally, and what many shops will typically do is stand up private networks outside of corporate IT to support some of these workflows. And we see that, but we also see a convergence starting to happen of running on IT backbones. Where is that sweet spot? I still have yet to really find it. And I think that the industry as a whole is still really defining that as we speak.
And one of the things I've seen is you take a picture of the back of a 512 by 512 SDI router and you tell IT, I need all of these things going into and coming out of your stuff all the time. So figuring out that segregation so I don't destroy the corporate network or the enterprise LAN, and we can still get things done in the broadcast world is, I think, critically important. Anything to add there, Andrew or John?
No, I think Mason put it very nicely, actually, because it is definitely the battle, right? IT departments, personnel, I mean, convincing everybody what you need, how you need to do it is usually the biggest challenge, hurdle. But I totally agree with the path and traversing the path and testing the path, because once you go through multiple switches or pathways, you find something, right? You find that, oh, that switch isn't capable of doing whatever it is you're trying to do. And you started out at maybe a 10 gig line or something, and you ended up passing through a 10 megabit one, right? And you're like, oh, I didn't expect that. And it's on some other building out in the back of some IDF, and nobody knew, right? That was out there, and now you're trying to traverse across a campus or something and hitting some minor switch in the way, and now you can't do anything, parts your audio, video, whatever. So it's definitely a gotcha out there, and something you may have to look into ahead of time.
Cool. So Brother Rick had asked, and I'll just take this one, differences between installing infrastructure with Ethernet versus fiber. So fiber channel was an old protocol usually used for storage and kind of maxed out around 32 gigs. It usually is a SAN setup. If you're talking about fiber cabling in the walls, that can be Ethernet over fiber. The maximum you can get on OM5 fiber is up to 100 gigs worth of speed. So the maximum you can get on copper today is 10 gigs worth of speed. So it becomes a question of how much do you need to feed down that particular pipe as to making a decision there. So Lewis has two questions. One, do you recommend manufacturer commissioning? And two, what do you think about going to the cloud for distribution? John, you want to take that one?
I do recommend manufacturer commissioning in concert with us, being the boots on the ground. A lot of manufacturer commissioning these days, especially with us having to deal with COVID, was remote. But it's always helpful to have the manufacturer commission the product, working with someone like Andrew in the field, or our senior project and project engineers in the field. Going to the cloud for distribution has improved. I think we're seeing that over the last, I'm going to say 10 years, as your major networks are starting to go up to the cloud as well. A lot of the thoughts about cloud, and we've touched on it in previous webinars, is you can put all the stuff up in the cloud you want, and they'll sell you storage for a reasonable amount of cost. It's the cost of getting everything back and sending everything out that becomes problematic, which is why you have S3 versus Glacier. It's called Glacier for a reason. You'll get it back. It'll take you a while, but you'll get it back, and it doesn't cost very much. But if you need things instantaneously, you need to know that first off, it's going to be expensive, and instantaneously doesn't mean right now. It could mean up to 4 hours. So I think it's really the matter of the use case and how much distribution you are doing on a regular basis. I think the more you have to distribute, the more you want to think about that. Actually, the more you want to think about going into the cloud and having that handled for you. If you're doing things once every couple of days or once a week, or distributing to your subsidiary offices, on a semi-regular basis, then doing it with on-premises hardware probably makes more sense.
Cool. So we're going to bounce to one answer per question because we're trying to get most of these done. We're not going to get all of our questions answered, but we'll try to get back to those in chat after the webinar. Mason, we've got a question here from Lydia, considerations to keep in mind when you're designing a live studio with an audience, balancing the quality of in-person and the broadcast experience.
That's a tough one. We're out here building Austin City Limits new stage, or ancillary stage rather, as we speak, and that's a fairly large audience studio, and it gets very difficult. It's an acoustician, or for the acoustician, for the lighting, for you have to keep people safe. You have to make sure people can egress out of the environment without having issue, while you still want to make sure you have a good quality production. It's a tough blend. Lighting techniques are very important in ensuring that you have lighting positions in key areas that will allow you to properly light your subject matter while allowing the audience lighting to not bleed over and into that. I've struggled with that throughout, and it's always, there's always kind of trade-offs. So it's about identifying your super hardcore priorities and then being willing to have some trade-offs and things that maybe aren't such a priority. For example, for us in Austin City Limits being a musical production, it's a rock show, there's so many lighting effects and other aspects of it to make that rock show feel that get dumbed down in those types of productions, because a camera won't pick that up necessarily as well as your human eye would at a live rock concert. So there's pieces like that need to be put into consideration as you make those decisions.
Cool. Sportflow's got a quick question. Cheapest studio and EFP camera chain right now, is it the Blackmagic Ursa Broadcast? What do you think of them? The Blackmagic is back-ordered to probably late fall. So if you've got something else you need, one of the things we're talking about with a lot of folks today is supply chain and availability, making sure you can get stuff involved, get stuff to your facility in time for you to actually get on the air. Bill Thompson is asking, do you think 5G will play a role in the equation of studio builds? John, any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think it will. 5G, I think, is going to have broad impact throughout the production and the broadcast community. There's a lot of discussion going on in the Advanced Television Systems Committee, the ATSC, for the introduction of 5G into ATSC 3.0, and we haven't fully deployed ATSC 3.0 yet. But yes, 5G will play a big role. I think especially, we were talking about communications before, because due to spectrum repack, the amount of white space has been drastically compromised. Going to cellular solutions, similar to one, you know, Clearcom and other companies have come out with, have become more and more important. I think 5G is a major contributor to that.
Cool. Rob is asking, is power still an issue with noise in audio and video lines? Andrew, thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's good practice, right? It's best practice. Keep them apart. Is it like the old days? No, but I think we should maintain old practices in that sense, right? Keep them separate because, you know, just in case, as much as anything else, you know, if there's no noise, it's okay. You know, we won't get, I don't know, false triggers or anything else, right? We just avoid that problem ever showing up. That's the way I deal with it.
Very cool. Mark is asking, how do you handle a situation where fiber infrastructure isn't available at a build site or an existing structure? Possible to negotiate with an area's cable provider, or does the client need to look at other options? That sounds like external feeds outside of a facility. I'm in a building that's currently served by Burbank Water and Power's fiber infrastructure. In Los Angeles, the largest amount of dark fiber is owned by LA Department of Water and Power. So there are other people you can talk to. I've also used companies that install cell towers because they're putting in heavy-duty fiber lines to their cell towers, and that can be an option there. And let's see, we've asked about that. Automation. Let's wrap up a chunk of these. We use M. Adler is asking, we use Blackmagic and Panasonic, and automation is wanted by management. Thoughts on that? It sounds like camera automation.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, it's a question of how these, you know, how your cameras are mounted, what type of cameras they are, and what your other equipment, the other equipment you have in your facility is. You don't, for instance, you don't necessarily need to buy Ross equipment to buy Ross's overdrive. It will interface with third-party vendors. Same thing with Sony ELC and the other automation. Most of them have become close to manufacturer agnostic. So I think we just I think you just need to look at the other equipment that you have, and you know, work with someone like an integrator, somebody like us, to help you figure out which automation solution is the best one for you.
Very cool. So let's go for a wrap-up question. Andrew, what do you think is the most important trend in TV studio design and build that's happened in the last 5 years?
Well, I probably touched on it already, which is Dante. I really feel that's come to the fore very quickly, and just the general flexibility that it brings. You know, I mean, it's route it wherever you want, how you want it, and I think that's been a key player, or will, if it isn't already in many, it will become so.
Very cool. Mason, what do you think is the most important design trend in the last 5 years for studios?
I'm going to take Andrew's answer and go even one step further with it, and not even Dante or even AES-67, but the slow evolution of broadcast into traditional IT type of systems. So we kind of hit on that earlier, and we always talk in any integrator or any end user working on the production side always hates when people say, "Oh, IT, we got to go to IT, we got to do this." It is simplifying everything. It is creating way less density in racks. It's creating way less density in equipment. It's creating lower power requirements. It's making more efficiencies for your environment. That transition is key. And that transition isn't going anywhere. That train's left the station, and that train is moving down those tracks fast. What people need to do, and even though it's what's the most exciting thing, I think it's exciting because I'm a young buck, as we can see on the call. I'm probably the youngest one here. So I know that a lot of the traditional broadcast folks are struggling as they transition through these new types of systems. And that is something that's the biggest exciting thing for me, but the biggest change over the last 5 years is the need to adopt and basically gain additional skill sets. The video skills, the audio skills, those aren't going away, even though we've changed the protocol and the way that signal is moving around. There's still advantage to having some of those. To the level that they used to be in the analog days and such, all right, those skills probably not as much so, but creating a hybrid team and a hybrid roles that do have the ability to cross between traditional broadcast production operations into IT operations is key. That's probably the biggest single thing I've seen in our industry, is that slow adoption into more centralized networking-based equipment.
John, wrap it up. The last five years, what's the most important trend you've seen?
I'm a longtime camera and lens guy. Obviously, what Andrew and Mason said were both very, very important things. But for me, and for my area of interest, it's high dynamic range. And high dynamic range has a lot of powerful applications. We talked about St. John's Cathedral earlier, where you have dark spaces in an old cathedral, but then you have speculars through stained glass. The Ed Sullivan Theater, where The Late Show with Stephen Colbert is produced, the same thing. Dark areas of the theater that you couldn't see earlier on, now that you use a camera like an HDC 4300 that has 14 stops of range, you can see details in the darks. By the same token, you can use the same camera to shoot the Masters or the Sony Open or what have you, and you can shoot very creative outdoor scenes with the sun there without getting those specular and washed out effects. I think actually what I think is, if you look at 1080p or even HD with HDR, I think that has more wow factor and visual effect on your eyeballs than UHD. So I'd say high dynamic range.
Awesome. And I think the most important trend has been having a team that has different thoughts on what the most important trends are and different specialties, so that they can all come to the table and get the job done for you, hopefully on budget, on time, and with the technology that's going to be, future-proofed. My apologies to Matt Damon. We're going to try to get all the other questions that came up during the Q&A answered in some of the chats, but that's all the time we've got. If you've got a project you need to get integration services on, and you need design, and you've got your architect, that guy on staff, give us a call. We can help out, and we can get your project done. Thanks, and everyone have a great rest of your day.